Presentation is on childhood trauma. This is by Kim Johnson, Kathy Disney, Teresa Davis, and Kyla Salmond. The categories of childhood trauma can include psychological, physical, or sexual abuse, emotional or physical neglect, witnessing violence, or living with substance abusers, mental illness, or suicidal or ever imprisoned members of the household. Some of the physical responses to trauma can include damage to brain and nervous system development, damage to neurological and psychological developmental processes, and a higher likelihood of psychiatric symptoms, physical illness, alcohol and drug abuse, or further victimization. Some of the relevant treatments for childhood trauma include trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy and eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. Next, we'll hear from Kim Johnson.
Childhood trauma is a very real problem, affecting 1 in every 4 children before the age of 16. Since it affects so many children, it is important to understand what childhood trauma is, what to look for, and how to treat the various symptoms. Childhood traumatic stress, or CTS, has been defined as a psychological reaction that some children have to it. You know what? I didn't say thanks, Kathy, and I didn't say hi, I'm Kim. Can I start mine over? Thanks, Kathy. I'm Kim. Childhood trauma is a very real problem, affecting 1 in every 4 children before the age of 16. Since it affects so many children, it is important to understand what childhood trauma is, what to look for, and how to treat the various symptoms. Child traumatic stress, or CTS, has been defined as a psychological reaction that some children have to a traumatic experience. It seems that if a person is just observing a naughty child, it would be easy to think that a child is simply being bad without digging deeper to understand the reasons behind the behavior. That is why it is imperative to know the symptoms in order to help every victim of childhood trauma get resolution. Childhood trauma can present itself in a variety of ways, including intense and ongoing emotional upsetting, depressive symptoms, anxiety, behavioral changes, difficulties with attention, academic difficulties, nightmares, physical symptoms such as difficulty sleeping and eating, and aches and pains. This is a very daunting list. The good news is that not every child who experiences trauma will end up with lasting effects. This depends on the child, on their own resistance, and the level of nurturing they have received as a child. It has been found that the consequences of trauma follow many into adulthood. In the mid-90s, a study was launched by the Center for Disease Control called the CDC Kaiser Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, or ACE. It was done to discover the impact of trauma on adults decades later. More than 17,000 adults were surveyed in San Diego by Kaiser Permanente. The results were astounding. The first surprising find was that trauma affects people across multiple populations. The most astounding find, though, was that ACE brought about multiple adverse outcomes in adulthood, such as cardiovascular disease, liver disease, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, suicide attempts, alcohol dependence, marital problems, intravenous drug use, and many more. The question was raised in the midst of the study. If there is one common thread to many of the preventable diseases we face in the U.S., why are we not paying closer attention? I believe this is the bottom line. It is too easy to just sweep these lists of childhood trauma symptoms and subsequent maladies under the rug, so to speak. If there was a way to help children while they are young, to bring resolution to the issues that they face. Why not help out our children? It seems it would save so many lives. It would save millions of dollars that is spent on medical and mental health care. The crime rate would be reduced. Now here is Kyla.
Thank you, Kim. I'm going to talk about how minority populations have also been affected by childhood trauma. People who have been affected by childhood trauma end up experiencing depression, psychosis, physical illnesses, alcohol and drug abuse, and also victimization experiences later on in life. And if you see the chart here, you can see that the child maltreatment rate, especially for non-Hispanic, Black-only individuals, is higher than any other ethnicity or race. So we see that this is a big problem and that it really affects many minority populations, and it's important that we as counselors know that. Also, there's a link between adverse childhood experiences, which are another way to talk about childhood trauma, ACEs, and then further depression in low-income ethnic minority populations. Also, for many of these populations who have tried to seek treatment for depression, they have often not received high-quality treatment compared to European Americans, and they had low rates of even seeking treatment in the first place. Child abuse and current PTSD also predicted future psychotic disorders, which is something that we need to know as counselors. And then just looking at other minority populations, such as sexual minorities, when looking at the LGBTQI populations and individuals, these individuals have a higher prevalence of trauma when compared to heterosexual populations, making them very vulnerable to not only experiencing childhood trauma, but then later on experiencing many of these adverse side effects. In one study, they found that exposure to any ACE increased the risk of being exposed to additional experiences by up to 80%, and then the probability of more than 2 additional exposures by up to 54.5%. So, I mean, those numbers are alarming, and especially for us as counselors, we need to know that effective treatment is really important and is necessary, especially for minority populations. And to talk about treatment is Teresa.
Well, we know that there's much room for improvement in treating traumatized children. It is encouraging to know that effective treatment for children who've experienced trauma is possible. Multiple studies have shown that methods that are structured and focused are the most successful. The 2 critical components within such methods are the establishment of a trusting therapeutic relationship and a trauma resolution activity that helps the child face and work through the trauma memory. The method that currently has the most research behind it is called Trauma-Focused Cognitive Behavioral Therapy, or TFCBT. And this method has 8 components. Overall, these components are designed to reduce negative emotional and behavioral responses for children who have experienced both single event or complex trauma. The treatment addresses distorted beliefs the child may have in relation to the trauma. It provides a safe place and a supportive environment for the child to talk about what occurred. It also helps parents or caregivers who were not a part of the abuse to cope with their own emotional distress so that they are better able to support their children. Another method that has shown positive results is called eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, or EMDR. In this treatment, the child focuses on the trauma memory in sequential doses while bilateral stimulation occurs. The bilateral stimulation can take various forms. It can be moving the eyes rapidly from side to side, following the therapist's fingers, or alternating tones in each ear, or lightly tapping on the hands, back, or arms of the child. One thought on why this works is that the bilateral stimulation forces the child to focus on the external stimuli while at the same time processing the memory. The dual focus may keep the memory from becoming overwhelming. Each set of bilateral stimulation lasts for approximately 30 seconds. After each set, the child is asked to report what they are seeing and feeling. The focus for the next set is based on the child's response. As negative thoughts arise, they're replaced with more positive ones. This gradual exposure and processing through the trauma memory continues until the child feels no further distress. Other interventions, such as music, play therapy, and art therapy, are often recommended for use with children who have suffered trauma. It is thought that those therapies access material that is stored in the nonverbal parts of the brain. Although more empirical studies are needed, favorable results from case studies and descriptive research suggest that these types of therapies have potential, perhaps especially when used in conjunction with the more structured approaches of TF-CBT and EDMR. Kim will finish up our presentation.
Here are some concluding thoughts. Thank you, Teresa. More intervention strategies that are culturally sensitive and holistic in nature are needed. We need to understand the effects of childhood trauma and look for ways to help our clients. Helping clients seek treatment can include trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, or the TF-CBT, that Teresa just spoke about, and also the eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, the EMDR, music, play, and art therapy. Further research really should include studies that are conducted in other countries and studies to determine outcome of using treatment methods for childhood trauma. And the good news is this is not the end. All these studies have also showed that many have been able to resolve issues in their lives, that human beings have an amazing capacity to adapt and change and to better their lives. Children can grow into healthy, loving adults who therefore will be able to reproduce other healthy, loving people. Adults can seek treatment and change their lives, therefore altering the lives of those they love. In the cycle of life, in the way bad makes more bad happen, good can also make even more good come about. Thank you very much.